How are we going to do this? What's our strategy? Getting down to the details. Cultural shifts is kind of like a fashion shift. And here's a simple way of looking at fashion. There are a couple global leaders who changed fashion. I don't think of Serena or Madonna. You see them wearing something and suddenly everyone wants to wear new things. Now there's also street fashion and the public. And that changes in a slightly different way. There's also all the stuff in the middle of, most people. They don't really think about it, but they get affected by the global leaders and by street fashion. We intend to work on the global leaders and on the public. More specifically, we work with leaders in all fields: politics, business, sports, culture. You saw the types of people on the podcast, and with more podcast branches, offshoots growing to reach lots of different areas that I personally don't connect with. The appeal is for people who act to create an enduring legacy, a legacy in an area of demand by billions. I can tell you a lot of the people I talk about, that I talk to on the podcast, they want to have a legacy. It's very meaningful for them. That's why they're well known. If you have all those means and you don't have to be in the public eye. If they choose to be, legacy is a big thing for them. And there's a big legacy to be had here because no one's doing it. And then also to change culture, to motivate votes, to match markets to demand based on new values. Because people want clean air, clean water, clean land. And that's through a TV show, is to reach the public. And I'll talk more about the show in a little bit. Now, these groups influence each other. Just like high fashion people get street fashion people get the most well-known people, we believe that we will do that too. We're not targeting what many other people are doing, which is the middle management, the rest of the people. We want them to keep doing that. We don't want to stop them, but we want to support them actually. And then there's ourselves. So the members of This Sustainable Life, we intend to continue acting with integrity to give us a credibility for people to follow us, and with humility to nature. We're not making this stuff up. So the stages. At first, we lead local communities, develop leaders in other communities. They lead their communities, and we keep repeating that. Are we going to come up with stuff from scratch that's never worked before? We don't have to. In Edwards Deming, I told you the story. He's got how to apply systems in corporate, industrial. When I say industrial, I don't just mean like factories, but to change whole industries, to change companies and industries. He has a very effective way of doing things. It's evolved a bit since then, and we intend to apply that. Likewise, for people to act now, opposite to what the prevailing winds are saying, great historical figures like Oskar Schindler and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who acted against much more difficult challenges, to say the least. Likewise, George Patton, Dwight Eisenhower. I think of Patton as, today he would be called probably toxic masculinity, but he outright said he loved his men. There was a deep, deep love. This is emotions, this is leaders. And he and Eisenhower, among many other leaders in the military, for example, could lead people effectively to take on huge personal risk. And they did, and we could learn from them. Of course, Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, these civil rights leaders, tremendous role models for us to learn from. Close to home for me, living in Manhattan, Jane Jacobs. I'm not sure if everyone knows who she is. She wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities at a time when the culture of the United States was build more roads. Where I live right now in Lower Manhattan would have been a highway if not for her, well, her and many other people. And she took on the power broker, Robert Moses, and the prevailing opinion of there should be more roads. Here, now, some of these people took on major organizational roles, but I want to point out some of the people who have been the most influential people in all of human history. The first women to wear pants in modern times in the West. Newspaper accounts said that they needed police protection, but really all they did was to do what they thought was right. Do you know any women today who have not at some point worn pants? I'm sure there are some, but very few. In other words, their behavior influenced billions of people. They didn't have to do all sorts of organizing civil rights marches and things like that, and yet they were effective, incredibly effective. And a few people doing these things can be all it takes to shift it over. It may take time, it may take some work, but the first women to wear pants are some of the most influential people in all of history. Now, American abolitionists, people who changed from one system to another. Harriet Tubman left slavery and went back into slave territory to bring others back out again. And we're going to need people who become and learn to act more sustainably and go back in to the unsustainable behavior worlds and say, let's come back out again. Frederick Douglass is another big example. We can learn from them. Now, that's American abolitionists. There was also abolitionists in Britain. A slightly different story, but actually very relevant, because the people in England lived thousands of miles away from where the slavery was happening. They could easily have benefited from it. And there were few individuals. William Wilberforce was one of the major figures. Thomas Clarkson, John Newton. They could have benefited from slavery far, far away. And really, if you look up in the book that I mentioned by Barbara Fries, they could have benefited from it, but they chose not to. And if you think about it, we in the United States, we're benefiting from someone seeing the pollution far, far away. It's a challenge, but we can change our behavior to help others. Machai Viravaidya, whom I mentioned before, I don't know if you can see the things behind him here are condoms. In fact, in Thailand, the condom is often called the Machai, named after him. He was an economist in Thailand, and he was going around and taking data of what people were doing out in the countryside, and he learned in his Western-style education, the solution to economic problems is generally growth. If you have disparities in wealth, if you have unemployment, you can grow out of these problems. And he put into his models growing, economic growth, population growth, and every time it showed, it would exacerbate problems. And he took it on himself, not just solo, but he was one of the major figures, I think this is in the 70s, that he started promoting family planning, the opposite of growth. A lot of people, when they think of family planning and population, they think of racist policies that the United States did. They think of the one-child policy, of forced abortions, forced sterilizations. Think the opposite. Think superhero characters. Think of slogans and giving everyone, all cops, all convenience stores, all had condoms to give out. He would go to schools so that they would play with condoms so that a condom became a natural thing. And in a short period of time, the birth rate went from, I think, 7 children per couple to, I believe, 1.5. No forced anything, all voluntary, all increasing stability, all increasing abundance. So what we do works. In industry, Deming. In politics, Wilberforce. These are role models. With public, Clarkson, Viravaidya, Schindler, Tubman, Bonhoeffer. These are all people who the public can follow. Among the elite, Muhammad Ali. That's another story. Ask me about why Muhammad Ali can be such a great role model for major public figures. To get this started, what does a sustainability leader need? It's not just any old leader can do this. Some leaders are effective in some areas and others are effective in others. But we believe that experience is necessary in science to understand what's going on, in business, because that's where the biggest changes are going to come from. And also there's a business behind organizing all these people, but also to take initiative and entrepreneurship to get this thing started. Leadership, that's what's missing. Public speaking, that's one of the major pieces of how to implement leadership. And to have credibility, living sustainably, this leader has to do it him or herself, to have integrity so that people can follow, and not just tell other people to do while they don't do it themselves, and to love doing the relevant grunt work. So you know a bit about me. I check off all of these things. Am I the only one? I'm not sure, but I'm capable, I'm able, and I love doing the work.